Okay, so this is chapter 23, section 3, all about Hitler and Nazi Germany, and the focus for this chapter as a whole is the question of what accounted for the rise of totalitarian states after World War I. So as Italy moved towards fascism after World War I, Germany moved towards democracy, at least at first. In November of 1918, 2 days before Germany's surrender in World War I, the German emperor fled the country, and then the German leaders that were left ended up forming a republic. A national assembly was elected to write a new constitution. The assembly met in early 1919 in the city of Weimar. This constitution that ended up emerging was remarkably democratic. The head of government would not be a monarch, but a president elected by the people. Women gained the right to vote, which is a right that didn't even yet exist in the United States. Finally, the Constitution granted everyone, including radicals who actually opposed this new democracy, the right to spread their views. The new government of Germany was called the Weimar Republic, after the city where the new constitution had been written. Even after the government relocated to Germany's capital, Berlin, in the spring of 1920, the name stuck. The Weimar Republic was pretty much in trouble from the beginning. One huge problem that it faced was that some of its leaders had signed the hated Treaty of Versailles in June 1919. This treaty stripped Germany of its overseas empire and took territory from Germany itself. It forced Germany to sign a war guilt clause in which Germany had to accept responsibility for starting the war. It also required Germany to pay billions of dollars in reparations for the harm the war had caused. Many Germans viewed the leaders who signed the treaty as traitors. Some began to question if the leaders of the new republic were actually responsible for Germany's defeat on the battlefield as well. So these attitudes are going to undermine the political legitimacy of the Weimar Republic from its very beginning. In addition to facing huge payments for war damages, Germany was looking at like $32 or $33 billion. They suffered other hardships from the war. Peace did not bring a return to economic prosperity. Food shortages continued and unemployment remained high. The country was racked by strikes, street violence, and threats of revolution from both the right and the left. Organized armed groups known as Freikorps sprang up. Led by former army officers, their ranks included ex-soldiers, unemployed workers, and general malcontents, or people that were just unhappy. Most were intensely nationalistic and radically right-wing. In March of 1920, one of these bands briefly seized control of the government, hoping to restore the monarchy. The coup, which is a sudden or violent overthrow of an existing government, ended up collapsing when communists and socialists called a general strike that paralyzed Berlin. Germans' discontent with the Republic was demonstrated when in the first elections held in June of 1920, the Weimar government lost its majority. More than 25% of the members elected to the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, wanted to abolish the Constitution. No group ever again held a majority of the seats. A series of unstable political coalitions tried to rule. More than a dozen coalition governments were formed by 1930. Remember, we talked about coalition governments when we discussed Italy and how it's like a temporary unity of political parties trying to achieve a common cause. None of them was able to take effective action on major problems. Trying to stimulate the economy, win public support, and deal with their massive war debt, the government printed huge amounts of money. Runaway inflation resulted. In 1920, a US dollar was worth 40 German marks. 2 years later, it was equal to 18,000 marks. By mid-1923, the mark was losing value with astonishing speed. In one instance, the price of a loaf of bread rose from 20,000 marks to 5 million marks in just 1 day. By the end of 1923, inflation had spiraled so out of control that 1 US dollar equaled 4.2 trillion marks. Wheelbarrows were needed to carry enough money to pay for daily purchases. A lifetime's worth of savings could not even buy the most basic necessities. The finances of people living on fixed incomes were utterly devastated. The chaos caused by out-of-control inflation inspired radicalism in German society on both the left and the right. Communists saw the opportunity for a Bolshevik-style revolution that they saw in Russia. Freikorps forces put down left-wing revolts throughout Germany. In Munich, Adolf Hitler, the leader of the right-wing National Socialist German Workers' Party, also saw opportunity in the unrest caused by the economic crisis. So if we're looking at the questions that we need to answer for Section 3 regarding Hitler and Nazi Germany, the factors that are encouraging the development of this totalitarian government in Germany are very similar to what was going on in Italy. Things were looking up after the war relatively. They were looking at a democratic government, giving people the right to vote, but that Weimar government was never able to form effectively, so ultimately they lose control. The most important piece, though, that encouraged the development of this totalitarian government in Germany was that inflation piece, where the value of money is decreasing so rapidly, and you go into the store to buy a loaf of bread one day for $3, and you go in the next day and it's $500,000. So there's just really no way for people to live on the way that the inflation is going in Germany at this time. So like Mussolini, Hitler served in World War I. He was born and raised in Austria, but he moved to Munich, Germany in 1913, which is before the start of the war. After the war broke out, he volunteered for the German army. He served throughout the war, but was eventually wounded. He was recovering in a hospital when Germany surrendered. Hitler was disappointed and actually enraged over the war's outcome. He viewed the German leaders who signed the surrender and the Treaty of Versailles as criminals. After his discharge from the hospital, Hitler returned to Munich in 1919, which is the end of the war. He soon joined the small right-wing German Workers' Party, which had been founded in the city earlier that year. In 1920, the party changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party. The word Nazi was derived from the German words for National Socialist. Hitler worked hard to increase party membership. Munich was home to large numbers of unhappy war veterans and people who opposed the Weimar Republic. Some 30,000 Freikorps members lived in the region. Hitler brought many of them into the party. The Nazis rewarded his efforts by making him their leader in 1921. One of his first acts was to form the party's Freikorps members into a private army. They became the SA, from the German term for storm division, or the brown shirts for the uniform that they wore. Like Mussolini's black shirts, they provided security at rallies, marched in parades, and terrorized communists and other enemies of their party. Hitler also created a 25-point platform for the Nazi Party. It called for Germany's rejection of the Treaty of Versailles and the expansion of German territory to include all German-speaking people. So we're kind of seeing this idea of nationalism coming back that we saw at the start of World War I. Other goals included the denial of citizenship and political power to those who were not ethnically German, and especially to Jews. Hitler proclaimed that Germans were superior to all other people and that Germany's problems were the fault of its two greatest enemies, communists and Jews. He condemned the Weimar government for failing to solve Germany's problems and pledged to restore Germany to greatness by creating a Third Reich, a third German empire to replace the one stripped by the Allies. This message appealed to many unemployed ex-soldiers, small farmers, and members of the lower middle class. By 1923, the Nazi Party had about 55,000 members. Hitler decided that it was time to take action. In November of 1923, a force of brown shirts and other Nazi supporters tried to seize the Bavarian state government in Munich. Hitler expected that other groups also agitated against the Weimar government would support him. They didn't, and the coup failed following a gun battle with police. Hitler was arrested and jailed for 9 months. He used this time to write a book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, which outlined his plans for restoring Germany to greatness. After his release from prison in 1924, Hitler worked to rebuild the Nazi Party. He decided to take power through legal means. He would organize a national party able to gain power through elections and use propaganda to attract mass support. Nazi groups soon sprang up throughout Germany. By 1928, party membership exceeded 100,000. However, in that year's Reichstag, or the German parliament, elections, only 12 Nazis were elected to the 463-member parliament. 4 years later, everything had changed. The reason was the Great Depression. After the American stock market crashed in late 1929, U.S. loans to Germany had stopped. The German economy depended on these loans. Unemployment rose from 8.5% in 1929 to 30% by 1932. Industrial production was cut nearly in half, and German exports fell by 2/3. Banks failed and credit dried up. As farmers went bankrupt, food shortages reappeared. The Nazis launched an intense propaganda campaign. It emphasized a message that would appeal to unemployed workers, farmers, and young people eager to support the ideals of German nationalism. The Nazis said that the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar government, communists, and Jews were responsible for the economic crisis. They promised to restore order, prosperity, and national pride to Germany. The Nazi message also appealed to middle-class Germans who were being hurt by the Depression or had lost status during the 1920s. By the end of 1932, the party had more than 1.4 million members. The desperate times made voters more willing to accept the Nazis' extreme views. In the 1930 elections, the number of Nazis in the Reichstag jumped from 12 to 107. In 1932, that number reached 230. Although not a majority, the Nazis were by far the largest party in parliament. After months of delay, in January of 1933, the Republic's president, Paul von Hindenburg, reluctantly appointed Hitler as chancellor, the top position in the cabinet. So, we know our leader is Adolf Hitler. He led the Nazi Party, or the National Socialist Party. And to take control, he used those brown shirts, or the SA, to terrorize their enemies. And in 1923, Hitler ends up staging a coup, or an attempted violent takeover of the government, but it fails. He ends up in jail, and 9 months later gets out of jail. And he kind of apparently reflected while he was in college and decided, or excuse me, in jail, and decided to take power through legal democratic means. So it worked because by 1932 the Nazis had become the largest party in parliament, and in 1933 Hitler was appointed chancellor. So for the purposes of this recording, I'm going to stop it here, and I will create another one. So there will be 2 parts to this where we answer the remaining 2 questions.